If you want dinner, lick it off the floor. Marcus's laughter rang out harshly, drowning out the soft jazz playing through the mansion. He had just knocked the plate of chocolate pastries from my hands. Pieces of cake scattered pitifully across his polished leather shoes and the luxurious marble floor. Every eye, his senior colleagues and business partners, turned toward us. A deadly silence fell over the room. Marcus looked at me with open contempt. He was no longer the polite son-in-law I once knew. He was a man freshly promoted, drunk on the illusion of power. Tilting his head, he said quietly, yet loud enough for those nearby to hear, that the old man had clearly lost his mind, and that perhaps a nursing home was more suitable for me than a high-class party like this. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. 40 years in military intelligence had taught me that the first man to reveal his emotions is the first man to lose. I lowered my gaze to the mess at my feet, then slowly lifted my eyes to meet his. Marcus hesitated. Perhaps he expected trembling or a desperate apology. Instead, he found the stillness of a lake just before the storm. I stood straight in my jacket and said 3 words that terrified him. I know everything. The smile on Marcus's face froze. The color drained from his cheeks, shifting from wine red to a strange pale white. He tried to speak, but his throat locked up. I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. He knew exactly what I meant. He knew the filthy secret he had hidden for the past 3 weeks had just been exposed. I stepped closer, leaned near his ear, and whispered that this was only the appetizer. Tomorrow, I would do something far worse. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing frozen in the middle of the whispering crowd. Marcus had no idea that his plan to destroy my daughter had officially failed the moment I spoke those words. He thought he was the predator. But he had forgotten one small detail. His wife's father used to train real predators. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. I stepped out of the banquet hall and felt the cold night air rush into my lungs. It all began 3 weeks ago when my daughter Sarah asked me to come by and watch the house for her. If I hadn't arrived 10 minutes earlier than planned that day, I might have remained forever blinded by the respectable mask my son-in-law wore so well. But fate had other plans. I stood there behind a half-closed door and heard things no father on earth would ever want to hear. A cruel plan was being laid out, one designed to push Sarah out of his life after he had drained every financial resource she had. Don't leave, because in just a moment I'll show you how a father quietly gathers evidence to trap a traitor. The hunt had only just begun. It all started on a gray Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks earlier. Sarah called me with the familiar rushed tone of a woman constantly spinning between meetings and deadlines. She asked if I could come over and wait for a plumber while she had to fly to Chicago for an urgent company project. I agreed immediately. For me, helping my daughter was the only real joy left for a retired old man living alone in a quiet apartment. I arrived 10 minutes early. When I unlocked the door with the spare key Sarah had given me, I was about to call her name, but a strange sound from the living room stopped me. It wasn't the television. It was the laughter of a woman, and Marcus's low voice. It was 2 in the afternoon. Marcus should have been at his law office. The instincts of a former military intelligence officer awakened instantly. I said nothing. Quietly, I stepped into the dark corner behind the large sofa in the study, where I could see through the narrow gap of the half-open door into the living room. Marcus stood there with his arms wrapped around a young woman in a bright red dress. It wasn't Sarah. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid they would hear it. Marcus kissed her hair and said he couldn't wait for the day they would finally be free. The woman's name was Amanda, an assistant at one of his partner firms. She asked about Sarah in a soft, playful voice. And that was the moment my heart felt like it was being crushed in my chest. Marcus gave a cold, mocking laugh. Sarah, he said. She's nothing more than a boring roommate now. Or more accurately, a business problem I have to manage at least, until I finish draining our joint accounts. He continued in a cruel tone, saying he was sick of pretending to be the perfect husband. The promotion he was about to receive, he said, would be the perfect launchpad for filing for divorce without giving Sarah a single cent. He called my daughter a card that had already outlived its usefulness. I stood there, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug deep into my palms. Rage flared inside me like wildfire, but the discipline drilled into me by the military extinguished it immediately. If I burst into the room right now, the best I could do was punch him once, and everything would end in a meaningless scandal. He would have time to destroy the evidence, and Sarah would be the one who suffered most. So I stood still like a statue, watching them leave the living room and walk upstairs. Each step they took felt like another knife driven into my pride. I had misjudged him. I had entrusted my greatest treasure to a monster wearing a human face. When the bedroom door finally closed upstairs, I quietly slipped out of the house. I sat in my car for 2 hours, staring at the steering wheel. I asked myself where I had gone wrong, but eventually I realized this wasn't the moment for self-blame. This was the moment for action. Marcus believed he was a clever lawyer who could slip through every crack in the law. He believed a retired old man like me spent his days mowing the lawn and watching the evening news. What he didn't know was that for 40 years I had learned how to destroy the careers of men far smarter than him without leaving a single trace behind. I picked up my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. On the other end was Tommy, an old teammate who specialized in technology and private investigations. I told him briefly that I needed surveillance equipment and a detailed financial report on Coastal Consulting Solutions. Tommy was silent for a second before asking if something big had happened. I looked back at Sarah's house and replied in an icy voice that someone had just crossed my final line, and I was about to teach him the price of underestimating a father. I started the engine and drove away. The plan was already forming in my mind. Marcus wanted a divorce while keeping every cent of the money. He wanted to leave my daughter with nothing after all the years she had sacrificed for him. I would show him what a real divorce looked like. But the one walking out of court with empty hands would be him. What would you do if you discovered your son-in-law was secretly planning to steal everything from your daughter? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because what I did next might surprise you. The next day I began my own professional investigation. I didn't tell Sarah. I needed undeniable proof, something so sharp and precise that Marcus would have no chance to defend himself. And when I started digging through his financial records, I realized the betrayal was far worse than I had imagined. Marcus wasn't acting alone in this performance. He had been preparing for it for a long time, and I intended to peel away every mask he wore until there was nothing left to hide his cowardice. This battle was only the opening move in a chain of collapses Marcus would never see coming. I met Tommy at a small diner tucked behind an old industrial district, a place where men like us could talk without worrying about curious ears. Tommy placed a thick brown envelope on the table. He looked at me with a trace of sympathy before sliding it across. "Darren," he said quietly, "you should brace yourself. Your son-in-law isn't just cheating. The guy's a vulture." I opened the file. Numbers began dancing in front of my eyes, but after decades of analyzing intelligence reports, I quickly grasped the core of the situation. Marcus had created a shell company called Coastal Consulting Solutions more than a year earlier. The truly disgusting part: he hadn't used his own money to run it. He had secretly withdrawn a total of $30,000 from the joint savings account he shared with Sarah. He did it through dozens of small transactions, just a few hundred to $1,000 each, carefully designed to avoid attracting Sarah's attention. She was always traveling for work, always busy. Marcus used that money to rent a luxury apartment for Amanda and to fund personal projects Sarah knew absolutely nothing about. I tightened my grip on the documents. That money was supposed to be the beginning of Sarah's dream, a vacation home for the family next year. Every dollar in that account came from her hard work and devotion to the life they were building together. And the man she trusted most had used it to build a second life with another woman. But that wasn't the worst part. Tommy pointed to a copy of Marcus's browsing history taken from his personal computer at home. Marcus had spent hours researching divorce law in this state, especially the clauses about minimizing spousal support and the strategies for proving that a wife was financially irresponsible. He had been quietly building a fabricated case to paint Sarah as a reckless spender and someone mentally unstable. His objective was crystal clear: once he secured his promotion, he would push Sarah out of his life and walk away with the house and all of their shared investments. Tommy asked what I wanted him to do next. I looked at the photo Tommy had taken Marcus and Amanda laughing together in front of the luxury apartment building. Then I told him I wanted every message, every email, and every money transfer between them backed up and encrypted. Catching Marcus cheating wasn't enough. I wanted to destroy his credibility in the legal world, where professional ethics were the only thing keeping him seated in that comfortable chair of his. I spent that entire night cross-checking timelines. Every time Sarah traveled for work, Marcus withdrew money. Every expensive gift he bought for Amanda had been listed as a client entertainment expense under his company. The level of calculation made me sick. Marcus believed he had planned everything down to the smallest detail. But he had forgotten the first rule of intelligence work. Every action leaves a trace. A strange calm began to settle over me. This was no longer just an affair. This was a fight for my daughter's future. Marcus liked to play the game of cat and mouse, but he didn't realize that the mouse he was chasing was actually an old tiger waiting quietly in the dark. I gathered the documents and stood up. I thanked Tommy and told him to keep following Amanda closely. I knew Marcus's promotion celebration party was scheduled for the following week. It would be the perfect stage for him to show off his new power, and it would also be the place where I would present him with a gift he would never forget for the rest of his life. Before leaving, I stopped in the diner's restroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back was no longer a quiet, retired old man. The soldier's eyes had returned. "Marcus, you chose the wrong opponent. You thought you could deceive an honest woman and outsmart an old soldier. Soon you'll learn that your legal knowledge means nothing compared to the lessons I learned on the battlefield." Subscribe to see how I use intelligence tactics to confront this cunning lawyer, because in the next part the real cards will finally be laid on the table at that luxurious banquet. I drove home with every step of the plan clearly mapped out in my mind. Sarah needed to be strong. She needed to see the truth, even if it hurt more than anything she had ever experienced. But before that moment came, I would allow Marcus to enjoy the final fleeting seconds of his glory. The higher a man climbs, the harder he falls. And I was going to make sure Marcus fell all the way to the bottom. That night I placed Tommy's file inside the hidden safe beneath the floor of my house. It was where the truth would wait along with the death sentence for Marcus's career and reputation. The hunt had officially entered its decisive phase. Marcus had no idea that every step he took and every word he spoke was now being recorded, carefully preserved for the final act. Then the night of his promotion party arrived. It was a glamorous evening at the very house Sarah had lovingly decorated corner by corner. Marcus moved through the crowd of guests in an expensive suit, that smug smile never leaving his face. He looked like a king celebrating his kingdom. But to me he was nothing more than prey confidently walking into a trap. I stood quietly in a shadowed corner holding a glass of water and observing. Sarah stood beside him, forcing a polite smile, though I could clearly see the exhaustion in her eyes. Marcus barely acknowledged her presence. He was too busy charming his senior partners and boasting about becoming the youngest partner at his law firm. The moment reached its peak when Marcus asked everyone for their attention so he could give a speech. He began with empty words about hard work and success. Then his gaze shifted toward me. It was the look of a man granting a favor. Marcus said he was proud to have such a simple father-in-law, someone who had taught him the value of being satisfied with what one had, even if that meant living a modest, ambitionless retirement. The crowd burst into laughter. I saw Sarah lower her head, her shoulders trembling slightly. But Marcus wasn't finished. When a waiter passed by carrying a plate of my favorite chocolate pastries, Marcus accidentally bumped the tray. The plate fell to the floor, crumbs and cream splattering across my shoes. Instead of apologizing, Marcus laughed coldly. "Well," he said, "I suppose old age has slowed your reflexes, Dad." Then he added one final insult. "If you want that dessert so badly, maybe you should lick it off the floor. I wouldn't want trash ruining my perfect celebration." That was the moment my patience reached its limit. I could see the disgust in the eyes of several guests, but Marcus was too intoxicated by power to notice. He thought he was humiliating me. In reality, he was digging his own grave. I didn't get angry. I took out my handkerchief and calmly wiped the stains from my jacket. Then I stepped closer to him, right there, in the middle of a circle of the most powerful people in the city. My silence began to make Marcus uneasy. The smile on his face slowly faded as I looked straight into his eyes, the gaze of a soldier who had stared death in the face more than once. I adjusted his collar. The gesture was gentle but carried an undeniable authority. Then I leaned close to his ear and spoke slowly, clearly. "Dad knows everything." I saw his pupils shrink instantly. He stammered, asking what I meant. I only smiled a smile that made him shiver. Then I continued quietly, "I know about Coastal Consulting. I know about Amanda. And I even know about the safe you think is so well hidden." Marcus's face turned from red to ghostly pale in a matter of seconds. He tried to grab my arm, but I brushed his hand away without hesitation. Then I looked over at Sarah. My daughter stood there with tears running down her face. She wasn't crying because of the fallen dessert. She was crying because at last she had seen the true face of the man she called her husband. I turned to the guests and spoke calmly. "I apologize for interrupting this wonderful evening," I said. "But it seems my son-in-law has a few legal and ethical matters that require his immediate attention." Marcus stood frozen, his hands trembling. The confident lawyer who had been boasting moments earlier had completely vanished. "If you've made it this far, please do us a quick favor. Subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means a great deal to us. Thank you very much." I took Sarah's hand and led her out of the room. As we passed Marcus, I left him with one final sentence. "Tomorrow, the real gift will begin to open." He stood motionless in the middle of the hall, surrounded by whispers from the very partners who had been praising him just minutes earlier. Now they looked at him like something contaminated. In the car on the way home, Sarah remained silent. I held my daughter's hand tightly and told her not to be afraid. "I'm here," I said. "And everything you've lost, I'll get back for you twice over." I knew Marcus wouldn't sleep that night. He would lie awake obsessing over what exactly I had in my hands. But no matter how much he guessed, he could never imagine the storm that was about to fall on him. The skills of 40 years in the military weren't decorations. I spent my life protecting my country, and now I would use everything I had learned to protect the most precious thing in my life. The confrontation at the party was only the opening shot. Tomorrow morning the truth would stand in the full light of day, and Marcus would finally understand that underestimating a father was the greatest and final mistake of his career. His performance was over. Now the sentence was about to begin. The next morning I asked Sarah to meet me at a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far away from the gossip of the legal world and the whispers left behind by last night's party. Sarah arrived with swollen eyes, but there was a steadiness in her posture that hadn't been there before. She looked at me. She didn't ask about the dessert plate. She didn't ask about the humiliation at the party. She asked only one thing. "Dad, what do you really know?" I didn't say much. I simply placed the file that Tommy and I had prepared on the table. It wasn't just a stack of papers. It was an indictment. Inside were the full financial records of Coastal Consulting Solutions, photographs of Marcus and Amanda together, and most importantly, the detailed plan Marcus had written, outlining how he intended to push Sarah out of the marriage with nothing. As Sarah turned the pages, I saw her hands begin to tremble. Then slowly, they clenched into fists. The pain in her eyes gradually gave way to something else. Determination. Sarah looked up at me and said quietly that she had been foolish to believe his promises. I took her hand. "You weren't foolish," I told her. "You were simply too kind to a man without a heart." Then I added softly, "But that kindness ends today." At that exact moment, Sarah's phone rang. Marcus. He had apparently discovered that the original documents were missing from the safe in his home office. I signaled for Sarah to answer and put the call on speaker. Marcus's voice was shaking, half threat, half desperation. He claimed everything was a misunderstanding, that the money had been moved only to invest in their shared future. I took the phone from Sarah and spoke calmly. "Your future ended the moment you knocked that dessert plate to the floor, Marcus." Then I added, "Now it's time for you to face the present. We'll meet at your office at 10 a.m., together with Sarah's lawyer." The final confrontation took place in the very office Marcus had once proudly shown off, walls decorated with awards and framed achievements. Marcus sat there looking 10 years older overnight. Around him were several colleagues watching with growing suspicion. Sarah walked in. She was no longer the silent, obedient wife. She placed the prenuptial agreement Marcus had once forced her to sign onto the desk. Marcus let out a strained laugh. "That document clearly states you get nothing if we divorce," he said. But Sarah cut him off coldly. She pointed to a small clause, one Marcus himself had added years earlier to protect his own interests. The clause stated that if either party attempted to conceal or transfer joint assets, or committed serious ethical misconduct that harmed the other's financial standing, the violating party would lose all inheritance rights and be 17, required to repay double the amount taken. Marcus's face turned the color of ash. He had forgotten that he himself had inserted that clause years ago to protect himself from Sarah. Now it had become the very chain tightening around his own neck. I stepped forward and placed another document on the table. A formal complaint for professional misconduct to the Bar Association. Then I spoke calmly. If you sign this divorce settlement, return the full $30,000 and leave the house immediately, we'll consider not sending this complaint to the bar. I paused. But if you refuse, you won't just lose the money. You'll lose the license you spent your entire life earning. Silence filled the room. Marcus looked around, searching for support. He found none. The colleagues he had once treated with arrogance were now looking away. Amanda had already disappeared. The moment she heard Marcus was under financial investigation. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. Slowly, humiliatingly, he signed the agreement. When we stepped out of that office, Marcus called after me with a bitter voice. "You think you've won," he shouted. "You've destroyed my life." I stopped and turned to face him. "No, Marcus," I said quietly. "I didn't destroy your life. I simply returned to you exactly what you planted." Then I added one final sentence. "The best revenge isn't anger, it's justice." I took Sarah's hand and walked forward without looking back. I saw my daughter take a deep breath, as if a crushing weight had finally been lifted from her chest. Marcus had lost everything. He lost control of the assets. He lost the career he had chased so obsessively. And most importantly, he lost the respect of every person around him. The coming months would force him to live with exhaustion, humiliation, and struggle, the very future he had planned for my daughter. Sarah and I walked toward the parking lot where bright sunlight poured across the pavement. A dark chapter had finally ended. And I knew that with the strength inside her, Sarah would rise again stronger than ever. As for me, I would always stand there, whether in the shadows or in the light, to make sure no one ever hurt my family again. 6 months after that fateful confrontation, I sat on a wooden bench in the park, watching Sarah laugh and talk happily beside David. David was a calm, thoughtful architect. He didn't wear flashy suits or speak with the polished charm Marcus once used so effortlessly. But in the way he looked at my daughter, I saw something far more valuable: genuine respect and sincerity. He didn't see Sarah as a business problem. He saw her as his world. Sarah had used the money she recovered from Marcus to start a legal support fund for women who are financially manipulated in marriage. She was no longer the quiet, patient woman she used to be. Marcus's betrayal had unintentionally forged a new version of Sarah, strong, decisive, and deeply compassionate. I looked down at my aging hands. These were the same hands that once held a rifle to protect the border, and the same hands that turned the darkest pages of hidden documents to protect my daughter's future. Many people asked me why I didn't take a harsher revenge against Marcus, why I didn't use violence to release my anger. I simply smiled and told them, the best revenge is not rage. It is patience, planning, and helping good people rebuild a better life. Violence only creates more destruction, but intelligence and careful preparation create lasting justice. Marcus now works at a small consulting firm in a remote town. He lives in a cramped rented apartment and carries the weight of enormous debt on his shoulders. And that is the sweetest justice of all. Watching a man who once looked down on others finally taste the same poverty he had planned for someone else. I stood up, adjusting my wool cap as a gentle spring breeze brushed past me. Life always brings cruel turns, but as long as we refuse to give up, as long as we have the courage to face the truth, light will always appear at the end of the road. I no longer lie awake at night worrying about Sarah. She's all right now. And so am I. If you've listened this far, I know you're someone special. Join our community by hitting like and subscribing to hear more raw, real stories about family and life. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. I walked towards Sarah and David feeling a strange sense of peace. A soldier may retire. A father may grow old. But the instinct to protect the people we love never disappears. It's never too late to start again. And it's never too late to protect the people we love with all our heart and all our wisdom. My story ends here, but I hope it serves as a reminder to anyone feeling trapped or powerless. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is simply the preparation for the most spectacular reversal of all. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you again in the next stories on Dad's Real Life Revenge.